where every voice stands. From the ground impact to the oil and gas scene, together we'll build a future strong and keen. We'll dive into the data, the numbers don't lie. Examining the challenges, reaching for the sky. Education, infrastructure, let's pave the way. With fiscal responsibility, we'll seize the day. Behind the agenda, plans in our hands. Exploring the progress where every voice stands. From the ground impact to the oil and gas scene, together we'll build a future strong and keen. Whoa, tune in every Wednesday, feel the vibe. For the stories and insights that we all prescribe. Plans, policies, and progress we'll uncover. With every discussion, let's support one another. Behind the agenda, plans in our hands. Exploring the progress where every voice stands. From the ground impact to the oil and gas scene, together we'll build a future strong and keen. Don't dive a deeper, strong and keen. We'll dive into the data, the numbers don't lie. Examining the challenges, reaching for the sky. Education, infrastructure, let's pave the way. With fiscal responsibility, we'll seize the day. Behind the agenda, plans in our hands. Plans in our hands. Progress where every voice stands. The progress.
Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Behind the Agenda, Plans, Policies, Progress. I'm your host, Cordell Jones, and as always, it's great to be here with you. It's Wednesday, April 29, 2025, and as always, we're diving deep beyond the headlines to bring clarity to the noise. On this evening's program, we're unpacking the recent trade tariffs imposed by the United States. The PNC and AFC wasted no time in firing off vague accusations of government incompetence, but offered little by way of actual solutions. Meanwhile, Nigel Hughes is now calling for a national political debate. But what does that even mean in real terms? We'll get into that and what real leadership requires in moments like this, and whether political grandstanding helps or hurts us as a nation. Also on the agenda, we turn to the economy. The government recently injected US $135 million of foreign currency into the banking system to stabilize the exchange rate and improve liquidity. But economist Thomas B. Singh is raising concerns. In a letter published today, Singh warns about moves like this and that it could erode our foreign currency reserves if not carefully managed. We'll break down what Singh's arguments mean for everyday Guyanese and whether there's real cause for alarm or is this just theoretical anxiety or anxiousness. As always, joining us is none other than Joel Baguddin. Joel, good evening and welcome back to the program. Happy to have you here with us. What's happening on your end?
Good evening, Cardell. Good evening to the viewers. And thank you for having me once again for another edition. What's happening on my end? Well, it's busy, lots of work, lots of things to do. And of course, there are some eventful big ticket items happening in our country, which I think is full entertainment, and I hope we get an opportunity to talk a little bit about that.
Well,
later on.
Usually, I wanted to get to that first, but let's get into the topics, and we'll try to get some time on the back end.
Let's deal with the serious business first, and then we can
discuss that. Talk to us a little bit about the impact and the implications of the tariffs that the U.S. would have recently imposed on us. And I'm pretty sure you're aware of some of the statements coming out of the political opposition. Very vague, not really offering any kind of solutions to either engage US or whatever it is. Talk to us a little bit about your assessment of what's been going on in relation to that.
So I want to the whole issue with the tariff is it's fluid globally, and we all know I've written a piece on it because when the tariff was announced, when I think a few days ago, uh, today's well, Wednesday
Mm,
last week when the tariff was announced for Guyana, the whole long list, I was bombarded with phone calls on the very night to from media as well as more so the private sector, some of our private sector leaders,
mm,
and for a comment, and for a comment and for me to share my thoughts and analysis and so on it. And I said to them, listen, I haven't followed it. I haven't read the statements as yet. And I need to study this issue thoroughly before I make any comment or before I can give you an opinion or advise you. So, so that's the approach I took. First, you ascertain the facts, you understand what is happening, and then I put out a brief on it, and I talk a little bit about, I give some basic examples, some basic scenarios, what the implications might be.
mm, mm.
And the key point that I made to the private sector as well as what I put in the public domain is that first we have to understand the context. And the context is that President Trump said clearly what were his policy intentions as regards international trade and the
Right,
US with the rest of the world since he was in campaign mode. So those tariffs, the announcement of the tariff was not a surprise. It was
right.
expected. And in fact, analysts globally and around the world, analysts globally and other stakeholders around the world, the private sector, the corporate world, everybody's paying attention, analytics firm paying attention since at the time of his election, before his election, and the first few days into his election, after being elected, sworn in as president. There are all sorts of preemptive analysis and so on. What might be the impact? What direction the world will go in? Will this are we heading into a global recession and that type of stuff? Now that's the context. So nothing came at a surprise. Now, when the tariff was announced for CARICOM and Guyana at I think 38%, there were all sorts of speculation and assumptions on how they arrive at this 38%. But as more information became available, we saw that we understand what is Trump's objective. We understand what is his objective as president. And the percentage was derived based upon a mathematical formula based on the trade balance, the trade deficit that the United States has with other countries in the rest of the world.
Mm,
So it was formula based. And I said to the private sector, looking at this formula, the formula does not necessarily take into account some of the qualitative facts. In our case, for instance, for example, we have to ascertain what are the items, what are the goods that we import from the United States. We import fuel, we import petroleum products, we import maybe some machinery and so on. And quite a lot of those products that we already import from the United States, they are tax exempt.
mm.
Petroleum is tax exempt. Machinery for agriculture, construction, and mining sectors, those are tax exempt. So those are not subject to any duties and taxes. So that is one dimension. That's one element I pointed out. The second thing is we had to understand what is the non-oil exports, because if you do the adjustment, they said in the addendum that petroleum exports and gold, these items are exempt. So if these items are exempt, then we have to take that out from the equation and adjust the trade balance.
Mm.
And if you do that, we only have a surplus with the United States because of oil exports. Take out oil from that, and you only look at your non oil exports, and take out gold from that equation, and you look at your non oil exports excluding gold.
Mm.
We actually have probably a deficit with the United States. Meaning, if we have a deficit, they would have a surplus, and if they have a surplus with us and we have a deficit with them, therefore the 38% would not apply. And so the vice president clarified further that when they look at the data that the United States relied on for the calculation, there were some variations, there were some mismatches between their data and our data. So that was another area of clarification that was required, and therefore another area in which we have some scope to negotiate. Listen, this 38% does not apply based on this formula. This is our data, and these are the other qualitative facts that I
Mm.
just explained. So that's the approach that I set to the private sector. They had a big meeting and so on, and this is how we should approach it. To respond with retaliatory measures, I said this publicly, that is not recommended at this point in time. You don't want to go down that road. So let's deal with it from this way. Now, as we speak here right now, I read a few hours ago that earlier today, rather, China announced that they're imposing 84% tariff, responding to the US. Now, this thing has less to do with America and the rest of the world, other countries, and
Right.
more so to do between
Yeah.
the rivalry between China and the United States. Right?
Yeah.
The rest of the world is just side effects of that. We're side effects. The main trade war here is between the US and China. And so this morning rather, I read that China announced 84% tariff in response to the US.
Mm.
Then by this afternoon, I read now let me read the latest update as of this afternoon. Um, the latest update as of this afternoon. Trump issues 90-day pause on tariffs, puts universal 10% for all but China. Donald Trump has raised tariffs against China to 125% and also
Wow.
issued a 90-day pause. Now, here's the interesting thing what Trump said. This is what Trump had to say. Based on the lack of respect that China has shown to the world's markets, I'm hereby raising the tariff charge to China by the United States of America to 125%, effective immediately. At some point, hopefully in the near future, China will realize that the days of ripping off the USA and other countries is no longer sustainable or acceptable. He continues, conversely, and based on the fact that more than 75 countries have called representatives of the United States, including the Departments of Commerce, Treasury, and the USTR, to negotiate a solution to the subjects being discussed relative to trade barriers, tariffs, currency manipulation, and non monetary tariffs, and that these countries have not, at my strong suggestion, retaliated. This is US President speaking. Have not retaliated in any way, shape, or form against the United States. I have authorized a 90-day pause and a substantially lowered reciprocal tariff during this period of 10%, also effective immediately. So during this 90 days, and because of this response now that China came out with 84%, now he's responding to that. Say, hey, what happened? You want to go to war, we go into war. 84%, 125% for you. And since all the other countries, including Guyana, have called the United States seeking to find a solution and negotiate, They respect the United States, so we're going to treat them differently. So
Right.
90-day period, the 10%, because remember the 38% was supposed to have been effective by now. I think it was the 8th or 7th or 8th of April, sometime then when he said it was effective.
Right.
But today's announcement, that now is on pause for 90 days, and that 38% no longer applies for this 90-day period.
Right.
10% applies. Now, this is the latest development as of now, as we're speaking. So, and we all bear in mind that we also have those other areas in which we could negotiate and so on. The discrepancy, the mismatch with their data and our data, etc. Now, having said that, I want to draw the viewer's attention to the statements on the very day that the announcement was made about the 38%. The EFC leader put out a statement, and then following that was followed by some statements coming from the APNU or the PNC.
Right. Right.
And their position was that EFC leader, more so him, my favorite. We have to have dialogue, and we have to have some discussion with the political parties, and his thing is about it's a whole load of bluff. It's a whole load of bluff, emptiness, and they talk about incompetence. They have the audacity to talk about incompetence when first first and foremost they have no clue about anything about trade, international trade, and the economics of trade and the trade policies. They have no clue about that. They just think everything it's about dialogue and we have to consult and so on. Look at the approach in which the government has dealt with it. The first thing we do, let's go to our data. And I can show you, I sent to the Private Sector Commission 6 points in terms of how to approach this because I couldn't go to the meeting. I sent them 6 points how to approach this issue. That was on the morning of Thursday. In the afternoon of Thursday, last Thursday, when the Vice President had his press conference, he reported what the government has done already in terms of dealing with this issue. And when I listened to him, what the government has done already, it is exactly what I've suggested to the private sector in terms of the approach. My approach that I outline is consistent to the approach that the government has undertaken. First, they went and they look at the data, they try to correspond the data, understand the formula, how they arrive at that, look at where there is scope for negotiation, and I've identified those areas in which that's the approach. That is what a competent government does, because the issue is one of a technical nature, and secondly, it is one of a political nature in terms of the US, their policies, their trade policy with the rest of the world, right? So that's how you have to first understand the technical component of it and deal with that, but they have no clue because they don't know. And then they talk about incompetence, right? So now I can understand if your definition and experience of competence or your standard of competence is actually incompetence, then obviously when you see what real competence is, that to you would appear to be competent, right? But but that's it. That's the situation, and that's it. And that I just wanted to make that point, that important point about their approach and how silly it was, how clueless they are, and how profoundly incompetent, in fact, they are, and how they have proven to be in relation to this matter. And imagine this guy wants to be president. Thank God.
A lot of people want to be president, but we can come to that just now. No, Joel, I want to draw your attention to this recent injection of US 135 million of Forex into the banking sector recently. Now, there was a letter, as I said earlier, by Thomas Singh, and he argued that this would erode our Forex reserves, among other theoretical points. What is your take on this issue based on Singh's letter?
So I've read the letter today in the Starbuck News, and the letter is divorced from reality. It is as simple as that. When I say divorced from reality, I mean if you're a student of economics or a student of business or a student of anything for that matter, what he has written, what he's talked about, is purely theoretical. There is no analysis. There's absolutely no analysis. Analysis meaning you take theory and you apply it to the reality, you apply it to the practical situation, the real situation at hand, and then you derive, you give your analysis, you give your findings, and you make a conclusion and recommendations. That's what a real economist does,
Right.
or ought to do, or any analyst worth their salt, not to come write or commentate on a public policy issue and you bring a textbook that you lift it from a textbook verbatim and you put it in the form of a letter. That's not analysis. But since you have raised the question and he's put that in the public domain, it is important that I make some comments on that. He is correct theoretically that if we continue to inject Forex into the market from the central bank,
Right.
it could deplete the reserve. But in theory, that notion is correct. But in reality, what are the facts? What does the data suggest? In reality, the central bank injecting and mopping up liquidity from the financial market is a matter of its normal operations in the conduct of monetary policy. It's not today the bank injecting money. The bank injecting money, central banks inject foreign exchange or domestic currency into the market as a matter of conducting monetary operations. And that is normal. That is normal. The question is whether we have a real foreign exchange problem. That is the question. The answer, according to the data, is no. So let's deal with the macro data. The macro data suggests that if you look at the net foreign sector assets in the commercial banking sector, it is over 500 million. The gross net foreign sector reserve is over 700 million US dollars. The net foreign sector assets, which is assets minus liability, is in the region of over 500 million. Over 500 million US dollars. Okay? US dollars. Now, when you add now the central bank reserve, if you add the central bank reserve to that, it goes up to to over a billion if we add the central bank reserve. If we add now the balance, because the NRF, the Natural Resource Fund balance, is also part of the country's foreign exchange reserve. So you can't exclude that balance. So the foreign sector assets of the country comprises commercial banks, central bank, and the natural resource fund. So if you add those three balances, it's over 3 billion. I'm using year-end figure for last year, right? If we use the year-end figure for 2024, previous year, it's in excess of 3 billion US. Put that into perspective. It is equivalent to two times, almost two times our external debt, meaning we could pay off our external debt completely. It is equivalent to nearly 5 months of import cover. The minimum benchmark is you should have at least 3 months import cover in foreign exchange reserves.
Right.
We have reserve totaling more than 3 months import cover, 5 to 6 months, I think when I run the analysis on average over a period over the last 5 years, it averages about 7 months. So with those, I remember we did this when we did budget analysis. I went into some of
Right,
these
right, right. Yeah.
empirical data, empirical analysis. So when you look at it empirically, not theoretically, but applying theory to do the empirical analysis, our indicators are solid. There is no cause for concern or whether the reserve will be depleted, nothing of the sort. In fact, our reserve is growing. It's not the inverse is true. The fact of the matter is, yes, import is rising, but our net reserve is rising at a faster rate than the rate of our import, because when you look at the data, net foreign sector assets rising in the banking sector, and so too is our reserve in the central bank, and so too is our reserve in the natural resource fund. So the reserve is not eroding, the reserve is growing. That is the fact. That is the fact of the matter.
Okay.
So, but the issue, what we have to understand, it is not a macro issue, because clearly the macro data does not support that there is a problem. The issue is one of a microeconomic issue at the level of the institutions, of the market participants, whereby a you have there is something called the interbank market. That interbank system is not, to my understanding, is not functioning effectively as it should. And then, of course, there is the risk of the Dutch disease. If you put too much foreign exchange in the market, if you flood the market, you could have a sharp appreciation, and we know what that could lead to. Your non-oil export sectors, the agriculture sector, the manufacturing sector, you could kill those off by becoming internationally uncompetitive. So that's what we have to manage. So it's not a macro issue. We are not eroding our reserve, nothing of this sort. Okay. So that's it.
Right,
That's it.
right, right. Now, Joel, since we discussed two of our main topics, I have a question here from one of our viewers. I don't stay up to date with all these financial reports and people giving assessments on tariffs and things. So I'll put the question on screen so you could see, and just answer the viewer whether you've seen if you've seen any policy statement or anything like that.
I've never seen any policy statement. Never,
So
never.
no, I want to ask you, what's your take on this whole tax situation as it relates to the Mohammeds, these vehicles? You're somebody who is involved in finance, and I'm pretty sure you've probably done an audit or two here and there. What are the limitations to GRA when they're dealing with things like this? I've heard explanations from the president, the vice president, the attorney general. You as a guy who's actually on the ground doing these things, talk to us a little bit about it, and your thoughts on what the information that you've seen out there so far.
So you're actually correct. I have done some of these audits. As you know, and it's public knowledge by now that I have a private practice,
Right.
professional services advisory firm. And recently, one local company hired my firm to he was a local company, a local uh, private sector businessman who has multiple businesses, well established businessman, known and prominent businessman, entered into a joint venture company arrangement with a group of Surinamis and one Trinidadian to form this JV company to service the oil and gas sector, to provide a service in the oil and gas, something to do with quality it's a technical service. I can't recall. I don't know all the technical details right now, but they've entered the market. They're certifying these oil tanks and so on, cleaning it, certifying it, that type of stuff. So an existing. So they're a group of people, individual or a company established in Suriname, and a guy from Trinidad. He's been involved in this business, working with larger companies doing the same thing on a larger scale.
Right.
So he left. He formed alliances with the Suriname group. They form a company doing this servicing that solely in other companies in Suriname. Coming now to Ghana in 2017 to do pretty much the same thing because we have a growing market. So the local partner entered into this JV, formed this company, and they started to service the market. They're getting clients, they're getting work, and he never he trusted them so much. He trusted them so much. He never questioned anything they do. He's signing off all the checks without asking question. Nothing of the sort. And but all after 3 years into this, let's call it a marriage, the JV arrangement, which is like a marriage. These guys, he sees money coming in because he's one of the signatories on the account, millions of dollars coming in. But yet the company is in debt and they can't pay him. He invested some money in the company and he can't get back his investment. He's not getting anything, but they're paying themselves super salaries and a whole bunch of stuff. So he started, but something is wrong. Something is
Right.
wrong. Let me get a professional to look after my interests. And so he hired me. When I did the investigation, get into the books, I did an audit. I found major financial improprieties, tax evasion. There was this intercompany transactions, inflating bills, a whole range violation of our local content laws or tax laws. And he had difficulty getting back his money. So I then engaged the services of a legal team because there are legal implications as well. So I did the audit, did the investigation, did all the financial audit. We prepared a report and we submitted to the authorities. And so I'm giving this story to establish at the outset that I'm speaking from an authoritative standpoint. The GRA, as far as I'm aware, has acted on that. They've moved in on that company. They've seized some of their assets that they have here, and they're about to move to court. So eventually, without naming this company, eventually the moment it goes to court, that becomes now public. That people could go and check on it. So I'm not going to reveal the name and so on. The point is that the GRA has sweeping powers. As the revenue authority of this country, it has sweeping powers legally. If they have evidence and the law provides, okay, so what happened? You give us, you tell us everything was okay 5 years ago. What happened now?
Right.
Now the law provides for that. There is something called review. Now, if there was some sort of corrupt elements, let's assume there was corrupt elements in that transaction at the GRA, and nobody knew. The vice president and the president, they don't run GRA, the day-to-day operation, so they wouldn't know.
Right.
If somebody commits a crime, perpetrates a fraud, or is engaged in corruption in any public agency, the executive won't know unless somebody makes a report or something find its way into the public domain.
Right.
That would then draw attention to it, and then trigger investigation and all of that. And that is that is exactly what happened here. Here you have the guy put the thing in the public domain, draw public attention to it, and now, hey, wait a minute, What's happening here? This how you pay $98 million, and you don't have to be a finance expert. You don't have to
Right.
be a finance expert. So that's the first point I want to make. I also want to bring a little bit of perspective. I want to get into a little bit of the politics of what's playing out here. And in terms of the events that we saw unfolded on that day, the Saturday morning, and events that ensued. This, and I want to say I want to make some personal references from my own personal experiences, and you'll understand why when I land what I'm about to tell you and put in the public domain. I don't. This group of people who this gentleman who is the subject of this issue we're discussing with the luxury vehicle and tax evasion. This protection that he has recruited from this group of people who the public, social media commentators, and others are referring to as scrapehead or thugs or whatever they call them. I would not refer to them as that. That segment of our society, those people who the public is referring to those terms, which I personally do not subscribe to, and I'll tell you why. I respect those people. That segment of our society, I respect them because I have had the experience to have been, I've dwelled among them. I've dwelled among them. And it is from this experience that I want to make some important points and draw this whole thing to the politics of what is playing out. My analysis, that is, of course. In 2013 to 2016, let's say the early part of 2000s, for 3.5 years, I was in Region 1, Port Kaituma. For 3.5 years, I dwelled among people, those type of people. And I respect them because those are the people I learn the most from. By dwelling among that group of people, I learned so much, what we refer to as street knowledge.
Right.
That's where I get whatever little street knowledge I have. And not only that, there was one guy who was a convicted criminal, served his time out of prison, and he was up there in Northwest. And I used to be around him, he used to be around me. And I would describe him as a reformed criminal because for 3.5 years he was around me. He didn't do me anything.
Right.
He didn't steal from me. He didn't try to harm me. In fact, he was one of them who, and a few others, that would look over me. The point I'm getting at, those people have this sense of loyalty. You take care of them, and they don't want much, They don't want house and land and car and millions of dollars, You, minimal. 3.5 years, I never paid them, I never gave them money. But I was dwelling among them, and I could tell you they had my back. Those people protected me for free. Nobody could come wrong me funny, nobody could harm me, nobody could do anything to me. And I'm drawing reference to this personal experience that I had to make the point that this group of people who that constitute a segment of our society, their way of life is being exploited. their way of life, their sense of loyalty, they don't care what you do. They don't care if you treat them a certain way.
Right.
You treat them a certain way, they are profoundly loyal to you, and they would put their life on the line for you. They would kill for you. Now, I've experienced that type of loyalty from these very type of people, this very segment of people. And this is what is now happening here. They're being exploited. They're now being exploited for a political vendetta. Has nothing to do with the good of the country or for the best interest of them or the country. But they're just exploited. And the events that we saw manifested a few days, just days after, without prejudice, to the unfortunate death of a young man who was fatally shot by a police officer. Now, you're a reporter on the ground. This matter has, let me tell you this matter has been unfortunately politically hijacked.
Yep.
Now, I'm not going to tell you what I know, what I picked up from the street. Let's call it street knowledge. You're a reporter. This is a big issue now. This is a big national issue. So I'm not going to say what I picked up, but I'm going to give you an assignment. When you go to Linden, and you talk to those people, find out what happened. The people in Linden knows exactly what happened. The people in Linden know exactly the story. They know why that man fatally shot that young man. They know the story. It is a
Yeah.
personal matter.
Yeah, I spoke to a couple of Linderners as well.
It is a personal matter.
Yeah.
It is a personal issue. It has nothing to do with politics. Absolutely nothing to do with politics. But what has happened? I saw someone on social media refer to the chicken hawks, the carrion crows. I'm referring to the political opponents of the PPP
Yeah.
now.
Circling.
They also know that this is they know what we know. If you go to Linden and you talk to those people, going to tell you the story. I don't want to be the one to put it in the public domain. But people in Linden, the people of Linden know. And now it has become a political saga. Violence. It has been used, exploited in a manner to create havoc, to demonstrate that you have the power to create violence and riot at the expense of another life, unfortunately.
Right.
Of another life, which should have never happened. And this here is coming from the old playbook of the PNC decades ago. And I'm giving you my assessment here. Decades ago, there was a time when the PNC controlled this grouping of people who would go and wreak havoc, who would go and create violence and burn tires in the streets and so on. But here is the difference. Here is the difference today. The motivating factor when the PNC controlled those people 20 years ago and 30 years ago is different today. 30 years ago, these people who would go out and create violence, perpetrate these crime and arson and burning the city, they were not necessarily loyalists to the PNC. They were loyalists to the PNC because they believe in the race hate fueled at that time, which is diminishing in our political economy, which is diminishing. right? So they only did it because, oh, we don't want an Indian government. We don't care if the guy eats salt and rice. We don't want an Indian government or a perceived Indian government. We don't want the PPP and the PNC control that group of people that created havoc. That is historical facts. But what has changed today? Then racism isn't working anymore. Racism is not working anymore. The only thing that has changed, the leader has changed. And the leader is playing to what currently motivates them. Race is not motivating them. But their new leader, is treating them in the manner that they want to be treated. He is compensating them. He is paying them, and that is fine. But this guy, he knows this. He studied these people, and he knows. He knows what I know because what he's experiencing, I experience it. I know these people. I dwell among them. They had my back. They protected me without me paying them a cent. And so he knows this. He's treating them well. He's paying them well. And he knows that those people will die for him. And if they say they're going to burn the city, they will burn the city. And that is the danger. That is the danger. So the motivating factor is different. And the leader has changed. And so this is a dangerous development that we're now contending with. The situation, the methodology, the objective has not changed from 30 years ago. It is the old playbook.
Right.
Sorry, I said the methodology hasn't changed. The outcome, what they intend to do, how they intend to do it, old playbook. But what has changed is the methodology. What has changed in that methodology? The underlying motivating factor has evolved from 30 years ago, and the leader has changed. They now have a leader because the PNC, the FCA got money to pay these people. 30 years ago, they've done it for free. They didn't get paid 30 years ago.
Yeah, but Joel, let me just jump in there. Now, yes, there's a new leader and he may be financially capable, but whilst he might be employing new tactics, these old persons are using the same thing. Now, Nigel Hughes would have been to Linden, and he was in a statement the AFC spoke to justice for Ronaldo Peters. This thing happened 1 day ago. So why do you think they're creating this impression like, it's been years and there's no justice for Ronaldo? The president that said there'll be an independent investigation. I think he said ISS will be involved in it. Why do you think they're still moving away from race as like a emotional grabber and using this point of, oh, you injustice towards you, look at this, despite what the president has said? What's your assessment of that?
Well, the assessment is simple. He's irrelevant. He doesn't have traction, but he's desperately trying to do what his new leader is doing. And the reason why he and the PNC, they're failing because they're not doing anything for these people.
Right.
They're not doing anything. That's the difference. They're not doing anything for them. They only want to use them, and they do not intend to do anything for them. But they will continue to use them every opportunity they get. So that is their role, as you've correctly pointed. That's their whole playbook methodology in conducting their politics to create and wreak havoc. But they have not been effective. Here you have someone else who hijacked the same group of people, exploiting them, treating them, doing things for them, which is fine, but he has a different agenda. His agenda and their agenda is the same. The politician's agenda, that is, the other, the FC and PNC. Just that he's taking care of these people, and so he's more effective. He's more effective. But like I said, this situation has nothing, there's no politics, nothing. It's a really, really personal thing.
Yeah.
That they came in and they hijacked. Yeah. And they will continue to do it. They will continue to do it.
Yeah.
They will continue. That's their modus operandi.
No, I want to bring your attention to something else. We've talked here on this program about the plethora of initiatives that the government has implemented to put money back into the pockets of citizens. Just today, the president would have made another announcement of the government paying for up to 8 CXC subjects for students in private and public schools. Talk to us quickly about what kind of money or how does this impact the disposable income of Guyanese for a student, let's say, writing 6 subjects?
We could do some easy calculations. How much? What's the cost
I
per
have no
subject?
idea. I didn't have no clue, not whatsoever.
Oh, let me make up something. Let me say $5,000 a subject, right?
Right.
So eight subject, 5 8's 40. That's 40,000. Let's say we have maybe 100,000 students will benefit from that.
210,000 in public and private for the last cash grant
I
that was
just use
given.
100,000. That's $4
All
billion
right.
dollars. That's $4 billion.
$4
Quick
billion
calculation.
back in
four
the
billion
pockets of
dollars.
Guyanese.
Assuming $5,000 a subject for eight subjects,
So
times
wait,
that by
wait, wait,
100,000.
Joel. I'm hearing it's $9,000 per subject.
Oh well, let me run that calculation. 9,000 times eight, that's 72,000. Let me use the same 100,000. That's 7.2 billion. And you
Wow.
said it's 200, well, 210,000 students in total, that
Right,
different levels.
right.
So assuming 100,000 CXC students per year per annum, that's $7.2 billion per annum there in disposable income. You're saving the parents that money, so they keep that money in their pocket. They have that money now to spend and do other things. $7.2 billion on
Right.
top of free tertiary education, which is another
Because the
40
year,
um,
goal,
is about
bid.
40 billion, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But then we hear persons talking about the government not focusing on national issues. You think that's a national issue? Taking that burden off of the CXC students' parents?
Well, as I established earlier, sometimes people have different definition for the same terms. My
Right.
definition for national issue might not be the same as yours. My
Right.
definition for competence might not be the same as yours.
Oh my goodness. Oh boy. No, it was something else I wanted to run by you. I saw recently. Um, I think it was Sherwood Low had an article. No, but that was on GCOM. Anyway, Joel, it's 9. We're going to wrap up here this evening. Thank you guys for joining us for another episode of Behind the Agenda. We'll be back here with you guys next week, Wednesday, from 8 p.m. As you would know, we have forward to article 669 or 29 is which one? The short Minister Manning-Chan, right? That starts at 7, and then me and Joel will meet here at 8 p.m. next week, Wednesday, discussing the matters that matter most to you. Joel, thank you for being here with us this
Thank you.
evening, giving your expert opinion on these topics. Thank you guys for tuning in. Ensure you share the live so that we get the widest viewership possible. And remember, join us next week. As I usually say before I go, it's all about peace, it's all about love, it's all about one Guyana.
In the heart of our nation, where voices collide, we're breaking down the policies with truth as our guide. With clarity on the mic, bringing light to the fight. Together we're ready, shining bright. Behind the agenda.